I would like to bring in my next guest. I am deeply happy that I could get him for this. I am deeply appreciative that he's joining me. We're joined with Commander, I'm sorry, Chief Master Sergeant Dennis Fritz. He is Chief, I'm trying to get this right. He is Command Chief Master Sergeant of the United States Air Force, retired, I should say. He is currently the director of Eisenhower Media Network with the mission to promote peace and diplomacy over war. While on active duty, he served as the principal senior advisor to four-star commander of Pacific Air Force and Air Force Space Command, just wow. He also held additional duty as senior enlisted advisor to the commander of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, basically NORAD. He is author of the book, Deadly Betrayal, The Truth About Why the United States Invaded Iraq. Chief Master Sergeant Dennis Fritz, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for this. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Your record is astonishing. That is an amazing pedigree. In fact, there's a lot more to that bio. I just made it shorter just for the show itself. What should I call you? Is it Chief Master Sergeant? Is that correct?
Oh, you got it. When I talk to many hosts, they always, sometimes, mix it up a little bit, but you got it perfectly. You can just go back. If you want to use my military title, it's Chief.
Okay, Chief. Okay. Mm-hmm. People who play Halo, they love Master Sergeant. That's the character, Master Chief.
Yeah.
But no, thank you for joining me, man. I when I asked you, I was like, okay, well, what? I wasn't sure how closely you were following some of the military campaigns, which is why I asked you to get more context. But you effectively are covering everything, so that is even better. Mm-hmm. As you point out, peace over war. What do you think of these negotiations taking place in Istanbul?
Well, it's fun. That's interesting that you start out with that. I'm following that real closely, and I think, as you mentioned about the Eisenhower Media Network, any peace movement, any diplomatic movement is good. There are going to be some ups and downs in regards to that, but I support what is being done in regards to peace in the Ukraine war, Russia war. I don't call the war in Gaza or the conflict in Gaza a war because it's a massacre. But in regards, and I'm assuming you're talking about conversations, Turkey has been involved as well in trying to bring peace to Russia and Ukraine war. And then another, conflict, the Pakistan, India, conflict that we must be discussing peace in. And so we can talk about any of those, but I will tell you, peace and diplomacy is the best way forward, regardless of any of those conflicts. And we can go into detail of which one you want to talk about.
Let's start with Russia first, and we can move to the other ones, because I've been hitting the Israel thing all day. That is just a massacre at this point that we've been backing. I mean, it ghastly, to put it mildly. We've been funding it to the tune of like 80%. It's just astonishing. As I told my other audience, I would have never believed that. Look, as an American, I have somewhat of a warped point of view on this stuff. And like, nobody at the radio station thought Russia was going to go into Ukraine. But again, you're talking about a country that's been invaded twice through Ukraine. The last time they lost 30 million people, the time before that, 10 million people in the First World War. You're talking about Napoleon invading, meaning it's a country that has had to deal with Western invasions over and over and over again. And they're seeing this putsch that overthrew the democratically elected government in 2014 with this raising of this largest military in Europe. Okay, so yeah, you're going to be dodgy about your borders under those terms.
Well, let me get going on that now. You got me all pumped up now.
Okay,
I want to talk about the Gaza massacre too later, even though you've talked about it, because you need to hear the history about that. And that's why I wrote my book, Deadly Betrayal, but it ties into what's going on in Gaza now. But let's talk about Russia and Ukraine for a moment there. Back in May of 2023, the Eisenhower Media Network put out a New York Times paid ad in regards to the history of the Russia-Ukraine war.
Did you?
Yes, we did.
Go
So
ahead.
you and your
Okay.
audience can Google that. New York Times paid ad. The title is "The America Should Be a Force for Peace." And what we did, let me just tell you this. Let me just give you a quick story of this. When the Soviet Union disbanded in the 90s and the Warsaw Pact was led by the Soviet Union at the time, and it was a counterpart to NATO. And when Gorbachev and President Reagan at the time came to agreement that they were going to disband the Soviet Union, at the time, we told the Soviet Union that we would not expand NATO any further because they were counterparts. The Warsaw Pact, NATO.
Is a famous
again?
1 inch to the east.
Wow, my man, you got it. And we told them that. And that's documented in the archives now, that we told them that. But guess what we did? We expanded NATO, and we kept expanding it. To finally, Russia's red line was Ukraine. And Russia threatened that they would attack Ukraine. Now, I must tell you, I was not confident they were going to do that. I said, no, they're not going to do that. But they were serious about that because they've given us a number of warnings. Now, to put this in context, what I tell different folks about this so you understand, because people like myself and others who explain this to the American people, some of the pundits come out and say, oh, you're a mouthpiece for Russia. No, we're not a mouthpiece for Russia. We're telling the truth about our imperialism. This war, on behalf of us, being done by the Ukrainians who are being killed each and every day, their infrastructure is being killed each and every day, is based on us pushing this. Now, to put this in context, I want you to think about this, your audience. If Russia was to have, and we have a map of this in that New York Times paid ad, okay, the U.S. should be a force for peace. We put a map. If Russia were to have nuclear weapons, fighter aircraft based in Canada and based in Mexico, we would lose our minds. We would be going crazy in fear because the response time of a nuclear weapon is already short, has been shortened if you have Russian missiles in Canada or Mexico. Well, that's what we did to Russia. See, we, the United States of America, have no empathy for others' security. Russia has security needs. China has security needs. We have security needs. Iran has security needs. But we only think our security is more important. Well, those countries think they're important as well. So Russia warned us and told us that if you continue to expand NATO, Ukraine is the red line, and we will fight for our security. And that is why this war has started. Now, let me just tell you something else. This war could have been prevented and stopped. The Ukrainians and the Russians had come to a deal to not have this war. But we, the United States of America, and the United Kingdom, we push Ukrainians in going to the war. Zelensky, we told them we will back you if you went to. Now, why do we want to go to war? It is part of America's imperialism. We want to control the world. That's a fact. I tell folks I can give you opinions, assumptions, and facts. Well, that's a fact. We have what we call America's exceptionalism. We can do what we so desire in the world, but nobody else can. Now, why do we want this war? Because of the fact we want to weaken Russia. That gives the United States more power. But at the same time, we are using Ukraine to fight this proxy war on our behalf. And that's a fact.
How you were in the belly of the beast. In real terms, I mean, your military pedigree is equal to nobody, right? I mean,
well, I wouldn't say that now. I wouldn't say that now, but I have been blessed. All those titles that you gave me, being out in major headquarters in the field. Also, you add to that, like you said, there's some things you could have had. I spent half my life in the Pentagon as well, so I know the ins and outs of the Pentagon, and I know the history. So I've been blessed in that way. But there may have been others. But I got to tell you, yeah, I'm probably one in few that has spent half my life in the Pentagon, and at the same time, to be able to go to some of these field headquarters and advise 4-star generals.
So, are they for this? I mean, they have to know that. Or let me ask you this. Let me ask the question this way. As Americans, I would tell you that when I was working at the radio station and this was about to take place, none of us believed it was going to happen. And as I tell people, I think that's because I have an American point of view. We have two oceans on our shores. Nobody is invading us. We have Canada and Mexico on our borders. Nobody is invading us. We have $1 trillion military. Nobody is trying to invade us. And so from our point of view, it's governed by the fact that we live in relative safety. Okay, that's not really true if you're in Russia and NATO is expanding to your border and you see this band of fascists that have taken over a country knowing full well they have the full backing of the West, and they've blown off Minsk Agreements 1 and 2. They've blown off the Istanbul Agreements, meaning they were clearly hostile. They've been attacking the Donbass with the U.S. consent. And so the Russian point of view is different. Meaning we got it wrong for the very fact that their point of view is different. What is the thinking in the Pentagon? How, like, when they're looking at this stuff and they're wargaming this stuff out, are they thinking they're bluffing? Or are they thinking this is a Hobbes choice? If they invade, we can bog them down in a military campaign similar to Afghanistan with the Mujahideen. Or if they don't, then we have NATO on their border where we can continue to push and push further. What are they thinking when they're looking at the world in this way? Meaning, because I don't know, I haven't been into it, but I'm always curious about what they're thinking internally into these organizations.
Yeah, let me just share this with you. As the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, as it's stated, Department of Defense. In most cases, let's say, for instance, let's not talk about the civilian leadership, which is the Secretary of Defense. Let's talk about the military general officers, like the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the service chiefs, which are the 4 stars that run the particular services. In most cases, if they've been to war, they don't want to go to war if they've seen it up close. And they try to advise against war most of the time because of the fact they've seen it. They know what happens during war. Now, when you talk about Russia, for example, we don't want a war with Russia because of the fact that leads to nuclear exchanges. And I can tell you, as part of one of my assignments, when you talk about, I was an advisor to the commander of Space Command. Well, at the time, we were the owners of our land-based nuclear arsenal. I've seen our ballistic missiles up and close personally, and you don't want to see that exchange. And so in most cases, you got to understand the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the service chief, they're advisors to the civilian leadership. And I must be frank with you, in most cases, it is the civilian leadership and civilian policy makers that are always talking about wars. Different administrations come in with agendas. You have different factions in our United States of America. I'm sure, as I listen to you talk, I said, man, he is so sharp. I'm talking about you tomorrow. And I got to tell you, you've heard this term neocons and neoconservatives, and they're war pushers. They believe in America's exceptionalisms. And this goes all the way back to the Soviet Union and President Reagan in wanting to defeat the Soviet Union. Well, we went around and bragged about that. We defeated the Soviet Union. Remember, once again, that is civilian leadership. That is policymakers, administrators. They come in with agendas. And when you look at the Republican Party, and I'm going to change up on you in a minute, they've always been a war party. They believe in this exceptionalism and imperialism. Now, unfortunately, the Democratic Party has become that way too. And that stems from my history of being in the Pentagon. And then, of all things, when I talk about the war in Iraq, this is in my book, Daily Betrayal too. Well, the turn of the Democrats becoming a war party as well to compete with the Republicans came about during the first Iraq war. You had people like Hillary Clinton, Biden, and at the time, I'm looking at his face, I can't remember who was running for president at the time. You had the Republicans saying that the Democrats were weak on defense. You remember, I see you smiling. They were weak on defense. And I have that in my book. That was the change of the Democratic Party becoming a war party. Now, why do we do that? War is profiteering. There's a saying, I don't know if you heard this, and there was a General Smedley Butley, who said the profiteering of war. And likewise, my organization, the Eisenhower Media Network, Eisenhower warned us, beware of the military-industrial complex. And so you have civilian organizations and administrations that come in pushing these wars, where you have those in the Pentagon tried to persuade them not to do that. But at the same time, what you must understand is that the generals in the Pentagon, their job is to advise and then, unfortunately, follow the orders of the civilian leadership. And that's how these things take place, of going to war.
That is amazing. And that's disheartening, because it seems like both political parties, as you pointed out, function the same way. Like, it doesn't matter which flavor you get, both effectively end up in the same idea of, it puts you in mind of the Brits a little bit, where they, despite the fact that the sun has set on the British Empire, they still walk around, like they're masters of the world. They can't even put 10,000 troops out, and yet they walk around like the masters of the world because they used to own 51% of the globe after the First World War. It's that, right? It's the thing that comes in our heads of, well, we're America. We must, control. We must dictate. Despite the fact losing a war, we still must act as if we won it. And it seems to get into the heads of the various presidents. I mean, it doesn't seem to matter who. It's fascinating to me that the generals tend to express caution. Hey, maybe you don't want to do that. And yet the civilian leadership pushes and pushes and pushes. Wow, that is amazing. I mean,
let me share one of the things you said just now when you said the Brits and so forth too. I tell folks, we in the United States of America, the country's building, we are the child of the UK, the colonialisms who spread throughout, not only here, but in Africa. The United States of America have the genes of the UK, and the UK runs around, they brag on our shoulders because of the fact they see the United States of America as their child. We took over the world at one time. Now our child, the United States of America, those first 13 states are controlling the world. That is our child. Yeah. And that's why they see themselves about, and that's why you see us working so closely together. Think about that. I shared it with my audience. Think about that. The United States of America is a child of the United Kingdom.
Is there a way to get peace in Ukraine short of Zelensky leaving? Like, look, I think these negotiations are theater. I don't believe that peace works in every situation. There's sometimes where people need to lose. I think the Nazis needed to lose. I think the band of Banderites that are in there now need to lose. And they don't want to stop. Like, despite the fact that they're being pushed on all fronts, they're snatching people off the streets in order to press into military, haberdashers, dancers, going into nightclubs, snatching people. They still continue to push and push and push. Zelensky, whose life is at stake if he signs anything, goes out there knowing full well that he can't agree to it, and yet they want to entice Donald Trump. So Trump says, hey, you better go to Istanbul. So he says, okay, I'll go to Istanbul. Like he clearly doesn't want to. And he's even there now saying, well, I'm only going to talk about a ceasefire. Okay, dude, the Russians have sent military people to accept your surrender, or at the very least to go for where they were at the Istanbul agreements. I think they're open to a deal, but it has to be a deal to settle all of it, not the ceasefire nonsense, meaning, no troops in Europe. That's a non-starter. The Ukrainian military is going to be decapitated, or at the very least decreased to a level where it can't threaten us in this way again. We've had to expend 100,000 Russians to deal with it. Yeah. Demilitarization, denazification, which means that government needs to change, and no expansion of NATO. Now,
let me say this. Let me mention this. When you say no expansion of NATO, well, that's already occurred.
That's rounded at this point.
Yeah, but let me just say this though. Yes, do I believe peace can happen? As I mentioned to you before, there was already a peace agreement between the Ukrainians and Russia. That's a fact. Again, as I try to give you opinions, but I'm trying to think of Boris Johnson. He went into Ukraine to say, no. We got you, the UK, our father, the child. We're the child. Hey, we got your back in the UK and the United States of America. United States of America, not the UK though. But Boris Johnson went in there. Okay, just say that. Now, can there be peace? Yes, but it's going to be some give and take. When you talk about expanding NATO, what's going to happen? And I was so glad when you mentioned that Donbass region. Those are Russian-speaking people. The Ukrainians were bombing them, and Russia told them to stop that as well. So in order to have peace, which I think there's no doubt in my mind, even though I'm not in his head, that Trump supports that with some of these so-called neocons and American exceptionals that keep pushing this war. The Ukrainians are going to have to give up that Donbass region because those are Russian-speaking people who want to be a part of Russia. The other thing that they're going to have to give up too is Crimea. If you're not familiar with that, I know you probably are, but for your audience, that is an ocean, that's a port that Russia sees they need. You know, they gave it to Ukraine years ago, but they want it back now because that is their access to the Northern Sea, I think it is. And they need that for their security as well. So I think once somebody talked Zelensky an understanding that, hey, you're going to probably have to give up Donbass, which he's saying no right now. You're going to have to give up. He's saying no. But let me just tell you this. Sometimes you can say that, but you're going to have to give that up because what you must understand as well, you talk about the carnage that's happening in Gaza right now. Let it be no doubt in your mind, if Russia desired to do that, they could completely destroy, without any nuclear weapons, they could completely destroy the infrastructure of Ukraine. Let that be no doubt in your mind if they so desire to do that. But they haven't done that. They've sacrificed thousands and thousands of their troops, but they can totally destroy Ukraine and their infrastructure if they so desire at any time.
Yeah. Sevastopol, Khrushchev gave it up.
Yes.
As 90% or more of the people chose to leave, and Zelensky's still like, nope, we're not giving that up. That's Ukrainian territory.
Yeah, let me just say something. But one thing, like I'm not a Trump fan at all, but I agree with all this. Zelensky, who are you to be saying no, no, no? He will be nothing without us. You don't see, even though you talk about some of these countries, Poland, for example, they'll come in for the rescue of them. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Everybody's looking on the backs of our shoulders to do that. Okay, so Zelensky, I think Trump's talking about, hey, who are you to be saying what you're not going to do? If we backed out of that, what is he going to do?
Well, that's the rub. Why doesn't Trump just walk? I mean, he could have came in and said, this is, Joe Biden's war. I'm done. Call it quits.
But see, you got to understand the Washington, D.C. area. That's a good question. I think he would. I really do. I'm going to give you two things here. I really think he would. Even President Obama went through this. I was disappointed in him, in Gaddafi, in some of the wars, in Syria. But there are people in the Washington, D.C. area. Listen, the lobby is strong here in the D.C. I live right outside of D.C. As I told you, half my life has been in the Washington, D.C. area and in the Pentagon. And there's a lot of pressure to push these presidents. I think he would walk. Now, at the same time, Trump is transactional. He looks at what can I get out of this? He says, now, there are a lot of what I would call American oligarchs, the billionaires that support him. But what they don't like about him, he says the quiet part out loud. When you were talking about all these wars, listen, none of these wars, and you take this to the bank. I've been in the Pentagon. I would give World War II a pass and the attack on Pearl Harbor. But every one of the wars that we've had since the Korean War has been about us chasing ghosts. It's been about minerals and profiteering. Every one of them. You take that to the bank. That is a fact. Now, Trump says the quiet part out loud. We want to control the minerals that are in Ukraine. We don't want Russia to have those minerals. And the quiet part out loud, you remember he kept saying, hey, we can do a deal. He actually said in the beginning, he told us he really wanted all their minerals. Now, that's why crazy to get that up. That's why they had that big argument in the White House. Trump is transactional. Hey, I want all the, then we'll support you. You remember that? We'll support you.
Wanted it all. Yeah.
See, there you go. And so I think he would have walked away, but somebody told him, hey, oligarchs, we can get some of those minerals. We can get mining rights into Ukraine. Whether it be in the Middle East, that is all about oil. That's why we want to control the Middle East. That's why Israel wants to control the Middle East. And we can talk about that another time. But I really think Trump would have walked away. I really do. And then somebody reminded me, hey, there's a lot of minerals. Then he said the quiet part out loud, almost like he said, hey, why didn't we take the oil in Iraq, when we went and invaded?
Well, they took the oil in Syria, and he said, well, we got the oil. We took the oil. We took the oil. We capped the oil.
I am so glad you said that. Listen, let me just mention that, too, when I talk about these wars.
Yeah.
We had no right having troops in Syria. They were a sovereign country under Assad, but we had troops under the disguise of fighting ISIS. Those countries can take care of ISIS if they wanted to, but we want to be in there, probably funding ISIS. But we had no right, and we were doing it through the American. I'm so glad you said that, because the American people need to understand this. We were not in there about ISIS. We were in there about the oil fields, protecting that to provide oil to Israel, And so that is why.
I mean,
the new guy
shook my hand yesterday. Yeah, he just. Yeah. This guy's
I tell you how it is. It's transactional. I have no problem with being this new guy, but remember one time this new guy was a so-called terrorist.
Yes. He was the leader of ISIS. He was one of the leaders of ISIS.
One of these. Yeah, exactly. That's why he can't go into Iraq right now. They're having a big summit with the Arabs in Iraq right now that they're hosting, and he will not be going because of the fact the Iraqis are upset at him because he was running part of the ISIS in Iraqi at one time.
Can we talk about your book, Betrayal? I have to be honest. People like Colonel Wilkerson, people like yourself, I am fascinated by the arc that you guys have taken. And what I mean by that is there's a perception that people in the military tend to be on the right. I mean, family members. My ex had family members who was in the military and were like voting for Romney. They had this hardcore right-wing point of view about military power and that type of stuff. And even when Colonel Wilkerson was under Colin Powell, there was this belief that, okay, these guys are backing this war. But as you're saying, they're captured on some level. We have civilian leadership in the United States, and civilian leadership sets the agenda for what takes place. Your book, Betrayal, that is a character arc, I suppose. I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to read the book, but I would imagine that at some point along the way, you came to this realization, like Smedley Butler, as you pointed out, this is a racket. This is not, for whatever the propaganda is that they say it is. It's not that. It's not a noble pursuit. They're doing it for other reasons, and they're using American lives to leverage, to accomplish those objectives.
Right. I'm so glad you said using American lives. And that was the reason why I wrote the book. And I want to give you a quick history of that. I don't know how much time we have, but I'll give you what you need.
You have space. Yeah.
You notice the title, Deadly Betrayal. And I entitled Deadly Betrayal because of the fact 4,500 men and women of our United States military died based on a WMD lie on behalf of Israel. Now, let me tell you why I wrote this book. After 9/11, all of us were frightened, didn't know what was going on. That was the first time we had been attacked truly, in the mainland, not counting Pearl Harbor. We were attacked. Nobody knew what was going on. We were all afraid. When Bush came in and said, we're going to war, and I appreciate you doing that, we're going to war to defend our nation, everybody was on board with that. We wanted revenge, and we supported that. But we in the military, after we defeated the Taliban, first of all, who had not done anything to us, the Taliban, but that was just an open door window to go into Iraq. Now, let me just tell you something, we always wanted to go into Iraq. And before 9/11 happened, when the George Bush administration came in, he was surrounded by the neocons, if you will, the warmongers. And they had a plan since 1991. Some of the names you may have heard, like a guy named Paul Wolfowitz, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Back in 1991, he was an Undersecretary of Defense at the time. And he wrote a page called the Defense Policy Guidance. And part of that was the United States world will control the entire world, to include the Soviet Union. But there's different factions to that. There was a major faction that was full supporters of Israel. And they surrounded President Bush, and they took control of the Pentagon at the time. Now, what do I mean? They were in critical positions at the Pentagon. And they decided, Bibi Netanyahu, what is happening right now in Gaza, he always wanted to do. Always. But the Bush administration at the time had close relationship with them. The guy who I worked under, Douglas Feith, who was the Undersecretary of Defense of Policy, he was the number 3 guy in the Pentagon. He had a close relationship with Bibi Netanyahu. And so he told him, hey, listen, we can't go in and do the carnage that you want to do to take over the entire Gaza Strip because you would kill too many people. But what we're going to do is, at the time, the 3 countries that we could not control, we had a peace deal with Jordan, a peace deal with Egypt, but the renegades, if you will, those that were fighting back against us were Saddam in Iraq, Assad in Syria, and the Ayatollahs in Iran. And so the neocons came into the Pentagon in the George Bush's administration to say, hey, listen, we're not going to go in urban warfare and kill all these people, which we did anyhow in Iraq. But what we're going to do, we're going to have military-to-military conflict. We're going to go in and attack Iraq first. Why? Well, remember I said it crossovers in the different administrations. Under the Clinton administration, it was creation of what we call the regime change policy, meaning we're going to go in and change the regime in Iraq. Now, what gives us the right to do that in a sovereign country? But he never did that. And so when the neocons came in and took control of the Pentagon and Bush's foreign policy, they said, we got to come up for a reason to attack Iraq that the American people will support. They couldn't come up with anything. If you look at the history, and I want to help you understand, during the first Iraq war back in 1990, when we attacked Iraq because to get them out of Kuwait, okay, there were neocons at the time, Wolfowitz being one of those, wanted us to stay there. But guess what? Guess who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time? Colin Powell, a general. And he said, no, we're not going there to control them. And believe it or not, Cheney was the Secretary of Defense at the time, and he agreed with Colin Powell. And we came out. Those neocons were upset.
Now, wait a minute. Wait, I'm sorry. Dick Cheney agreed to not go into Iraq at the time?
That was in the 90s, the first Gulf War. Yeah. Cheney became a changed person. We can talk about that too. There's a lot of. I'll tell you.
I'm sorry, that. Please. That would be shocking to the audience. That's shocking.
Yeah. To me. Again, we came out of Iraq based on the recommendation of the Pentagon. There were neocons that wanted us to stay to control it, but Powell said, "No, we got a mission. We went in and we got that mission. We got Saddam out of Kuwait. We're coming home now." Now we did keep some resilience forces there. And what we had a military operation called Southern Watch and Northern Watch, where we said at the time Saddam could not use his weapons to, guess what, to attack the Shia in the southern part of Iraq and the Kurds in the northern part. We were going to protect them, okay? So we kept some forces over there, but we were not going to control Saddam, and we left them in power. And there were neocons that were upset at that. Wolfowitz being one of those, who was an Undersecretary of Defense in the Pentagon at the time. Now, yeah, that's surprising, but we'll get to Cheney in a few minutes. But Cheney became a changed man, okay? Now, with that said, when this new administration came in, and how Cheney became the vice president, you must understand, is he was hired as the transition guy for President Bush. And, the transition is one to help them pick their cabinets. They were looking for a vice president, and Cheney said, hey, why not me? And then here came all these neocons who helped Bush get into office. Now, they came in with a sole mission of, hey, we didn't take over Iraq that first time, but we're going to do it this time while we have the power to do it. So when they came in January of 2001, their sole goal, their first foreign policy thing was to go into Iraq, but they had to have a reason to do that. And they couldn't come up with anything. They were going to use lies. It's in the book. People need to read this book. It's in the book. They were going to use lies to say, hey, Saddam attacked the Kurds in the north. He used helicopters, which he wasn't supposed to use. He was going to attack the Shia. Because what people understand that part of the country, when I say that in Iraq was split into Sunnis, which was the minority sect of Islam in Iraq. And then you had the Shias, who was actually the dominant, which are now. And then you had the Kurds. And so they were really split. So Saddam kept everybody under control under umbrella. But once we went in there, they all segregated. The Shia took over the south, the Kurds took over the north, and Saddam had whatever was left over. So we were looking for excuses. We couldn't find an excuse to go to war where people were supported. Guess what happened? Unfortunately, 9/11 happened. Scared, I hate to use this term, but scared the hell out of the American people. We were willing to go to war. They created this war on terror. Think about this for a moment. Why did they create this war on terror? It's in the book so that we could go in under the disguise of the war on terror and go after those governments, Saddam, Assad, the Ayatollah, who allegedly supports terrorism. We're going to take those governments out. Now, the big question is, why do we want to take these governments out? This is a fact in support of Israel, so that Israel could take over Palestine and the Gaza Strip, kick the people out, and make it all of Israel. That is why we went to war in Iraq. Deadly betrayal, lying about WMD, war on terror. We were scared to death after 9/11. They said Saddam could give weapons of mass destruction to terrorists to come over here and attack us. So we must take him out. That was a lie, all on behalf of Israel, a lie. That's why I wrote the book. When I got back and I retired from the Air Force, somehow I found myself back in the Pentagon working with those nuts. The guy I was working for, Doug Feith, was writing his so-called book to defend what they did. I was working for him, helping him to write his book. When I saw the lies he was doing, I was part of the declassification team. I said, these guys, you heard the term cherry picking intel to go to war? They definitely did that. That's in the book too. As he was writing the book to tell lies, I started writing my own book and said, one day I'm going to counter those lies of them, because 4,500 military men and women lost their lives based on a lie, and 1 million Iraqis lost their lives. That's what made me write this book. Now, let me just say one other thing. I know you're going to jump in. Let me say one thing, how it ties into today. We told Bibi, you're not going to go in it. We're going to take care of this. Once we knock out those governments, then Hamas and Hezbollah are not going to have the military support they need, to challenge Israel. Now, let me tell you something. As I tell my family and friends, one other question. Remember, family and friends, you said about the military tends to be, more conservative and all that. We are indoctrinated when you come into the military. So that goes all the way back. Remember, I said the Republicans back in the day were considered the war party, the military party. Well, when you come into the military, usually when the Democrats were in office, you'll remember this, the military budgets would decline back then. We would get low pay raises in the military. All of a sudden, the Republicans, Reagan, would come in and say, hey, we're going to give the military raises. We're going to support you. Yeah, we're going to support you. We're going to send you off the war, but we're going to give you military pay raises. That's what causes the military folks to become more conservative and usually side with the Republicans, more so general officers. Why? Because the general officers get their weapons of choice under the Republican Party. So that's why, like Powell was a Republican. He was a moderate Republican, but he grew up in that environment under the Reagan. He was Reagan's national security advisor, as a 3-star general. And then Cheney, the family, they hired him. So he grew up in that environment of being a Republican, but he was a moderate Republican. So that's why you see that, as far as that. But now let me get back to what I was going to say about this in regards to Bibi. And now, when we went into Iraq, you heard about, remember, the insurgency, and that's in the book too. We got bogged down. Our plan was to go in and take out Saddam and then Syria next under the disguise of fighting terrorism. Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, where Syria had so-called chemical weapons too. There you go, that we had to get rid of. And so we were going into Syria next under the disguise of fighting terrorism and getting rid of their chemical weapons. However, we got bogged down in the insurgency in Iraq because they fought back. That's where the 4,500 died. Now, fast forward to October the 7th. Oh, let me just say one other thing. I got to get this out too, because many people have said this. I said I give you opinions, assumptions, and facts. There are many people on the far right and the friends of the far left have wanted me to say 9/11 was an inside job. I can't say that. That's where you have the conspiracy theories. But there's some that believe that. Highly educated people that believe that. Even engineers that have told me believe that, because they say the way those buildings came down, the aircraft couldn't have done that. It was like a demolized. It was just a controlled demolization. And they say that. Now, here's what I can tell you. This is going to shock you and your audience. And this is a fact because I know it and saw it myself. There were people in the Pentagon that was glad that it happened. Let me say that again.
Excuse me?
There were people in the Pentagon that were glad that it happened. Now, why were they glad that it happened? Once again, that gave them the excuse to implement their plan that they came in January. Listen to what I just said earlier. Under the disguise of war on terror, we can never allow that to happen to us again. So now we have to take out those governments. That gave them an excuse to go into Iraq and to plan to Syria next and then Iran last because of the fact we were hit by 9/11. That gave them the rationale. You remember I was saying they were trying to find excuses to go in to Iraq to implement their plan? Well, 9/11 gave them that excuse to go in and fight those wars under the disguise of the war on terror. Now, real quickly, and then I'll shut up and answer anything else you have. Bibi Netanyahu, as I stated earlier, always wanted just to go in and just mass kill all those people who wouldn't allow him to do that. We were going to fight these wars. October the 7th happened. Now you've heard people say, well, how did that happen? Did Bibi allow that to happen? Conspiracy? I don't know. But what I will tell you, I live right outside of Washington, D.C. Where I live, if some terrorists or we had an invasion by anybody, it don't take 5 or 6 hours to get from Washington, D.C. to where I live to overcome that. Why did it take so long? The most secured nation on earth, Israel, why did it take so long for their military to respond to that so-called alleged attack by Hamas? Why did it take so long? Was it allowed? Now, here's what I'll tell you. I always tell people to use your own critical thinking. That gave Bibi, like 9/11 gave us an excuse to go into war, that gave Bibi the opportunity to do what he always desired to do. And listen to this, and you and your audience go back and check this out. Bibi is on record as saying, October 7th is now our 9/11. October 7th is now our Pearl Harbor. Now, America, you have no right to stop us from going in and tearing Hamas up and tearing Gaza up like you did in Iraq. Who are you to tell us what we can't do? Because this is our 9/11 now. This is our Pearl Harbor now. And so we're going to go in, get rid of Hamas. One last thing, and that's how it ties into now. One last thing when you talk about Hamas and Hezbollah. Well, first of all, we're the ones that say they're terrorists. They identify themselves as freedom fighters. That's why they were created. People must understand that since 1947, how do you become refugees? The Israeli Ashkenazi Jews came in from Europe to take over that land with our support and take over and push the Palestinian people out of their land they've been on for thousands of years, and they became refugees. Now, here's how I make it hit home with you and your audience. If your parents had owned some land in North Carolina or South Carolina, and all of a sudden some Ku Klux Klan will come in and say, this is our land now, it was in your family for 1,000 years, it's no longer yours. That's what the Israelis did to the Palestinian people. And as I told some of my cousins, my granddad left us a plot of land in North Carolina. If some folks came and said, we're going to take that land, what are you going to do? One of my cousins told me, Dennis, you know what I have in my kitchen? You know what I have in my bedroom? They're not coming here. I'm going to fight back. So you look at Malcolm X and you look at Martin Luther King. You had Martin Luther King going to do it peacefully. You had Malcolm X say, hey, we're going to fight at all costs. Well, that's what Hezbollah and Hamas are doing. They chose to fight. All this about this terrorism and our American. I want to tell you all this. We are complicit in that war that's taking place in Gaza now. We fund Israel. We give them the equipment. And guess what? We give them diplomatic cover in the United Nations. We are complicit. So what I tell people, we are complicit in killing innocent women and children. And here's what I'll leave you with too. 90% of our country, of our Congress, to include our Black Congress people, 90% support giving Israel all these weapons. And what I will tell you and your audience, if they choose to support the innocent killing, no matter who they are and where they live, if they support the killing of innocent women and children to stay in power, to stay in office, because they're scared of some Israeli lobby going to come in, Jamal, Corey, and who stood up to the Israeli lobby, and we're going to pay money to put you out of office. If you're willing to lie and cheat and allow the innocent women, killing of innocent women and children, imagine what they think of you and me.
Is it really just the lobby, or is it ideological? And what I mean by that is, what do you say, our unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East? And Joe Biden said it himself, if it wasn't there, we'd create it. Meaning we have a settler colonial state in the middle of the Middle East that allows attacks into various other countries around that region. We back them to the hilt. We give them all the money, diplomatic support, all of that stuff. So is it entirely, oh my God, we're terrified of AIPAC? Or is it, no, we're an imperialist country. We like the fact that we have, let's say, effectively whites who have taken over, white European Jews, who've taken over that area. And they are kind of like the other. And the reason I say this is, if you look at it, you're looking at about, 15% of the globe that lumps together and calls itself the West.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they create a colony in the middle of the Middle East that breaks up the continuity of the Middle East and allows attacks in that.
You're describing it so perfect. Yes.
So I guess I'm saying, is it entirely AIPAC, or is it also an ideological point of view? Joe Biden didn't do anything. Like these people, I would have to go back to Richard Nixon, where Richard Nixon would make this argument. Yeah, there are times where you have to tell people to stop. Or maybe Ronald Reagan, when Ronald Reagan was like, I'm shocked that I had the power to do that. Yes, you do, because you paid for all of it. So give me your take on this. You've been there.
That is a great question. And you ready for this? It is both. It is a Israeli lobby, AIPAC, and then some of its ideology. You ready for this? The reason I say some of this ideology. The Jewish people are indoctrinated too. They don't understand. Many of my friends, my sponsors, listen, what people don't understand, there are more Jewish protesters out in the streets and all these campuses than anybody. That is not broadcasted. There are more Jewish protesters. They're the ones who have not been indoctrinated or broke the indoctrination that we are God's chosen people. They are Ashkenazi Jews that converted to Judaism. They're not the original that came over. They don't have listen, Bibi Netanyahu grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. How is that his land? Now he's the president of that land. He grew up in Pennsylvania. You have the Palestinians that lived there for thousands of years who got pushed out. Now, when I say it's ideology too, you have some, and let me just say this, and I always tell folks, we got to be able to separate Jewish and Zionism. The ideology is Zionism, the colonialism, the belief that, hey, we can go in there and take that land and colonize it with our people from Europe, if you will. We'll allow some people to come in, Ethiopia, but we're going to keep it like second class. The Ethiopians are treated worse than we are over here. You follow me? That's a fact too. So we're going to allow some of them to come in. Zionism, the far righters that feel this. Now, when I say it's also ideology, then we have what you call Christian Zionists. They are the white evangelists that believe, hey, there's their land and we're going to support them. But guess what? They are indoctrinated too. The government of Israel provides free trips to ministers and pastors from the United States to indoctrinate them that, hey, we are the good people and the Palestinians are the bad people. A fact again, I've talked to a couple of those ministers. One went over there open-eyed because he was warned about that. He said he was pushed to the side because he questioned what the Israelis were telling him, who invited a free paid trip. Those that they knew that they had, like, for example, the current ambassador to Israel, United States ambassador to Israel, a guy named Huckabee, is a Christian Zionist.
Lunatic.
Okay? That's the ideology as well. Now, the AIPAC portion of it, they're the ones who fund this. They fund all this, whether it be the free trips to pastors, the free trips, you ready for this, to members of Congress, which my congressperson, Steny Hoyer, who usually escorts a lot of these members of Congress to indoctrinate them to that ideology. So there is an ideology piece of it, and then there's a funding piece of it that's led by, because there's a number of Israeli lobbies, but they're led by AIPAC.
Yeah. I give you another one, Cory Booker.
And I said, you heard me say Cory, right? I said Jamal, then I said Cory.
Cory Booker is on video trying to explain to a bunch of Israelis how to indoctrinate African Americans to the cause of
that Cory. I was talking about the female when they get. Yeah, listen, I shared that with some of my friends. Let me just tell you about it. Yeah, I shared that with some. Listen, I'm trying to educate us too. We are in
video. And he's like,
on video. I shared that with some of my colleagues and friends to show them. But that's how it started. Listen, I talked to a number of these folks. Like I said, some of my sponsors are Jewish who are against this. They're not Zionists. So we got to separate. As I tell folks, there are good blacks, there are good whites, there are good Indians, there are good people from the Indo-Pacific. There are bad Jewish people, and there are great loving Jewish people. The Zionists, I tell people how you separate the two. The Zionists are the Ku Klux Klan of the Jewish people.
Yes.
Because as I stated earlier, which does not go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm glad you said that, because Booker was explaining to him where African Americans, because of the history of this country, would identify and empathize with the situation of Gazans. So you have to get the political leaders very early in their career.
Young.
Basically, you have to juice them with money very early to get them on your side. And it's like, okay, that's disgusting.
Let me tell you this. Listen, that's why we got to open our eyes. Let me tell you this. I am so disappointed in him. But listen, early on, until I found out, I was a fan of Akeem Jeffries. You know what? He gets more money. He's the number one. How do you think he became the leader of the Democratic Party in the Congress? Because of the fact he gets more money from AIPAC than any other members in Congress. Your audience can Google that. Bought and paid for it. That's why I said 90%. When I said Cory earlier and Jamal from New York, and Cory, I think she was from, I want to say Michigan, they got voted out because Bush.
Cory Booker's from New Jersey.
Yeah. She's from Jamal is from New York, and she's from New Jersey.
Yeah, Cory Booker's from New Jersey. He's
not Cory, not Cory Booker. Yeah, he's from New Jersey. Yeah, he's bought and paid for it. I'm talking about, I think, Cory Bush, who got voted out by AIPAC. They spent all that money because she supported the Palestinian people. And that came from AIPAC money. So going back to your original question, that was a spot-on great question. It's both ideology, Christian Zionists, indoctrination. What a great example when you said Cory Booker. I shared that, and that should be shared by everybody, showing how you indoctrinate. Because I was wondering, I say, how do these folks in Congress become so, hey, I support it? Oh, let me tell you something else. You done got me started now. You're going to be saying, I'll never have Fritz on again. Last summer, hey, I tell folks, I don't like the winter. I stay hibernated in the winter like bears and so forth. But last summer, I spent a lot of time on the Hill helping doctors against genocide. These are doctors that have been over there and seen it and can't even get time with members of Congress. I went over on the Hill a number of times, walked the halls of Congress. You will not believe the number of Israeli flags standing outside of Congress and their offices. I support Israel. You know why? Because AIPAC told them to do that. I was going in to try to meet with other veterans and so forth. I was going to try to meet with members of Congress, and they wouldn't meet with us. Veterans now of wars. But then you saw all these AIPAC people that was welcoming open arms. And the one last thing I will tell you when I tell veterans, when Bibi Netanyahu, you remember he came in and spoke to our Congress and got all the standing ovations. Some of our members didn't go. He made a comment that because there was a lot of folks out on the Capitol demonstrating his appearance before our Congress. And doing his words, he said, you got people out there that are demonstrating against my visit and so forth, and they are pawns of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. Well, guess what, Bibi Netanyahu and our Congress who stood up and gave him a standing ovation. You know who was out there protesting? Me, Dennis Fritz, who served 28 years. Larry Wilkerson, a retired Army officer and State Department official under Colin Powell. A lady by the name of Ann Wright, a colonel retired in the United States Army who was a diplomat who resigned because of the Iraq War. many other veterans out there protesting because Bibi Netanyahu, along with our Congress and the Bush administration, got 4,500 members of our armed forces killed based on a lie on WMD on behalf of Israel. And what I tell our members of Congress, Cory Booker, Hakeem Jeffries, you are pawns of Bibi Netanyahu. That is a fact.
I have to get your take on something else, and I'll let you go. The audience is loving you to bits.
Well, I'm sorry if I got to, but listen, my wife told me, sometimes, Dennis, you act angry. This is worth being angry about.